Thank you very much, Iris. And yes, my name is Ali Hood. I'm Director of Conservation for the Shark Trust and a partner of the Shark League for the Atlantic and Mediterranean, who are also co-hosts of this evening's event. And thank you all very much for attending to learn more about this magnificent species. So far this evening, we've been privileged to share some of the incredible shark encounters, the footage and the photographs captured by Behind the Mask and Fred Buyle, with some particularly rare footage of Makos, a species not often caught on camera by divers. I would like to now dive into, excuse me for seeing how my slides progress, dive into the issues and the concerns surrounding tonight's focal species, the short-fin Mako. And as we've seen from Fred's images and hopefully from the footage to come, it's truly one of nature's wonders, the fastest shark in the sea, but unfortunately a species that encapsulates the disastrous impact of fishing with no limits. The dangerous decline of Atlantic short-fin Mako sees the Shark League and colleagues tackling one of the world's most pressing conservation crises. And the Shark League has been promoting and tracking support from Atlantic fishing nations for urgently needed science-based catch limits to save this endangered species. So why is this such an urgent problem? Well, as Fred was discussing just a moment ago, Mako are long-lived species. They mature late, with lengthy gestations and producing a very limited number of pups. And in March 2019, the IUCN classified the short-fin Mako as globally endangered, meaning they face a very high risk of extinction in the wild. The short-fin Mako is one of the world's most economically valuable sharks, sought globally for its meat, fins, and for sport fishing. And for more than a decade, scientists have warned that slow growth rates make the Makos exceptionally vulnerable to overfishing. This global oceanic species is fished by many nations and taken in high seas fisheries managed by regional fisheries management organizations, the RFMOs. Yet no international catch limits have been agreed. And because of concern over their precarious state, both the short fin and the long-fin Mako were listed on CITES Appendix 2 in August 2019. The Atlantic high seas fisheries are managed under the purview of the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas, or ICAT. ICAT comprises 53 parties, including the EU, and covers an immense sea area as illustrated on this map. The member organizations of the Shark League are observers to ICAT, and we work to inform and influence the parties for the benefit of science-based shark conservation. Yet Makos have been plagued for decades of unheeded warnings and inaction, which I'd like to briefly illustrate. And for those interested, the timeline that I'm using along the top of this graph or this slide can be found in the 2019 Shark League ICAT fact sheet on the Shark League website. In 2008, ICAT scientists produced some long-standing advice for sharks, recommending management measures for species with the greatest biological vulnerability and noting that landings prohibitions could be effective for species with high long-line survivorship. It's really important to note here that short-fin Mako survivorship, when released at the side of vessel, is up to 77%. Since then, ICAT has prohibited retention of big-eyed thresher, oceanic whitetips, most hammerheads, and silky sharks, as marked on the graphic there by those orange stars. Yet despite short-fin Mako ranking first among 20 pelagic shark stocks for vulnerability to ICAT fisheries, and third overall in the 2012 ICAT Ecological Risk Assessment, they continue to be fished without limits. In 2017, ICAT scientists undertook a stock assessment for short-fin mako with really sobering results. This Kobe plot here, the graph in front of you, you can clearly see how that stock is sitting in that red quartile, and this is not a good place to be by any means. Mako in the North Atlantic indicated a 90% chance that they were being overfished, and that overfishing continues. The 2017 advice was extremely clear. If the Commission wishes to stop overfishing immediately and achieve rebuilding by 2040 with over a 50% probability, the most effective immediate measure is a complete prohibition on retention. And the results at ICAT was the adoption of a measure which actually continued to permit the retention of dead makos through a number of exceptions, doing nothing to incentivize the avoidance of this vulnerable species. In 2018, ICAT failed to make time for makos almost at all, with mako barely making the agenda of the annual meeting. But in 2019, ICAT scientists reconsidered the stock projections, and the dire state of the North Atlantic mako was truly reinforced. This graph illustrates the probability of recovery under different fishing pressures. The green line on the graph, that's situated at the top of that stack of colours there, illustrates the probability of recovery under different fishing pressures. And there is a yellow dotted horizontal line which indicates 70% probability. And this is the 70% probability of success of recovery. And you'll note that even under zero mortality, it would take nearly 45 years to have a 70% probability of recovery. And current levels of fishing pressure do not even register on this graph. So what does the 2019 science demonstrate? Well, there is a clear recognition that the 2017 recommendation is not effective and will not halt overfishing, let alone allow rebuilding. That the scientific advice remains intact, that they need to adopt a non-retention policy for North Atlantic mako without exception. And what does the fishing pressure look like then? Who is catching mako? And what ICAT parties are championing mako? What can we do now to address this conservation emergency? And it's an emergency that will already take decades to repair. So this graph is an illustration from the landings data for 2017-2018. Around the outside, you can see those parties to ICAT who have been fishing. And just last night, the latest data was released by ICAT, so excuse this slightly rapid graph, but you can see here that the orange color on the graph is Spain, the green color is Portugal. And if we go back to the previous slide, the EU member states were responsible for over 60% of the landings over the past 5 years. And this position has not changed in recent times. So the total catch in the Atlantic for 2019 was over 1,000 tons. I'm sorry, the way the slides come up on the screen, it blocks the text that you can see. So the total catch was in excess of 1,800 tons. And if we go on to the graph that I showed you previously, you'll note that the ICAT scientists did not project above 1,100 tons. And that's the red line at the bottom of this graph that is basically flatlining. At the current fishing pressure, that population is just going to continue to decline. But this also indicates why we are so focused on the EU. The EU here can be seen to be taking the lion's share of the landings, responsible for over 60% of the landings. And indeed, Portugal's share has increased, both in tonnage and in percentage share. In fact, the EU has the highest mako landings in the world, and yet has set no catch limits on the species outside of the Mediterranean. Spain in particular, as you can see from the graph, takes more mako sharks than any other country and is responsible for nearly half of the North Atlantic catch alone. To make matters worse, the EU uses the lack of ICAT catch limits as an excuse to delay the setting of an EU quota, despite being a co-sponsor of the proposal to list Makos under CITES. So inaction by the EU in turn hinders political will in other countries. The EU's major role in the North Atlantic Mako depletion brings responsibility to take the lead in reversing declines. Failure to take the first step of basic limits on catch, while presenting itself as a champion of ocean conservation, smacks of hypocrisy. And it is vital that the EU honours its global commitments. It heeds scientific advice and works to secure immediate domestic and international bans on North Atlantic Mako fishing. So what is the remedy? Well, given the scientific advice, this would seem clear. ICAT can adopt, either by consensus or by vote, the advice its scientists have given for preventing the collapse of North Atlantic Makos, completely prohibit retention and work to minimise post-release mortality. In the meantime, CITES parties, which does include all ICAT parties, are required to demonstrate that Mako exports and landings from the high seas are sourced from legal, sustainable fisheries. Yet EU member state evidence in the form of what's known as non-detriment findings are not in the public domain. There is a significant lack of transparency on these issues. So who is championing Mako in the face of EU's opposition? Well, at the ICAT 2019 annual meeting last November, Senegal and Canada led an initiative to establish the science-based short-fin Mako limits advised by the scientists. It's fantastic. Their proposal was co-sponsored by the Gambia, Gabon, Panama, Liberia, Guatemala, Angola, El Salvador, and Egypt, and supported by the 2019 ICAT annual meeting through floor statements from Norway, Guinea-Bissau, Uruguay, Japan, China, and Taiwan. The level of support for this proposal was significant. But this joint science-based Mako proposal was opposed in 2019 by the European Union, the United States, and Curacao. These parties pushed exceedingly complex counter-proposals that fell far short of scientific advice, allowing hundreds of tons of Mako to be landed. The US Curacao proposal even permitted continued killing of Makos that make it to the boat alive. This is furthermore emphasised by the fact we're aware that for 2020, the landings of sharks by Spain as a member state, if you recall, they already had the dominant catch, already exceed a level that would allow recovery of Mako, just Spain alone, within the next 50 years. So what do? We have some champions, we have the obstacles, and we as the Shark League have been engaging parties to ICAT throughout the past 12 months since the last meeting of the ICAT parties in November 2019. We have our ICAT pledge document. We are calling on parties to see if their country is on the map, to show their dedication to the scientific advice by following this pledge and getting their country on this map. And I really encourage you to visit the Shark League website, sharkleague.org, and look at this pledge document. It's available in a number of languages, and see what you can do to pressure other countries to get themselves onto that map. But it isn't just about other parties. So each and every party, regardless of its Mako landings, is important for securing an ICAT agreement stringent enough to save Makos. And while the EU may act as a single party at ICAT, we need EU member states to speak out individually, to influence the EU's position, its mandate, ahead of ICAT, and to recognise that science should sit at the heart of shark conservation, that the wishes of 2 member states, Spain and Portugal, should not undermine the conservation credentials of the other 25 member states. And importantly, to recognise that there is a gap left by the UK's exit from the EU. The UK was an undeniably vocal member state and was willing to stick to the scientific position and urge other member states to speak out. And we now need new champions, and Germany, the current EU president, and often a champion of sharks in other fora, is really well placed to step up. Ending overfishing of sharks and rays requires sustained action by all relevant government agencies, conservationists, and the public. And alignment and collaboration between governments and environmental and fisheries agencies is essential. The EU champions sharks at CITES, champion Makos specifically at CITES, and we now need the EU to stop hindering progress and start to follow the science in the North Atlantic. We have been calling on member states in correspondence, in person, as scientists, as conservationists, as passionate shark fans. So tonight, we're asking you to join us in a call to action. Collectively, we can emphasize this message to the European Commissioner, calling on him to follow the science and become an active part in safeguarding the future of this exceptionally vulnerable species. You can find this link on all of our social media platforms and in the chat. It's a very simple process, a click to tweet. And you can help us generate the critical mass that Fred mentioned earlier, making sure that this issue is something that the European Commissioner cannot ignore. In a moment, Iris will also tell you specifically how you can encourage the German government to step up and be that vocal champion for Makos within the European Commission that we require. So before I hand back to Iris, I just need to acknowledge a few people. I'd like to thank our funders, the Shark Conservation Fund, the co-hosts and fellow speakers, Shark Project, Behind the Mask, and Fred Buyle, and you, the audience, for supporting our call to action and for getting your friends, your family, your co-workers to also support this call to action. It is incredibly important. And I particularly like to thank my Shark League colleagues, many of whom will be listening here tonight. And I'd like to thank them for the excellent publications that you can find on our website and on which I have drawn very heavily tonight. Thank you very much.